Hello and welcome back to Women's Football Hub. I am your host for this episode. I am Carolyn Kent, and this is our first podcast back after the UK Christmas break. And do I have someone with me today who's going to take away all of your January blues? Because with me today is a performance nutritionist who trained at Liverpool John Moores University. She's previously worked at Manchester United, providing nutrition expertise for the women's first team and the under 21s. And she is the current performance nutritionist for the England Rugby Red Roses and also Williams Racing. Welcome to Women's Football Hub, Aimee Ellen O Keefe.
Hello, welcome. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, listen, it's lovely to have you on. I've been watching a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing on Instagram, and we'll obviously get to that later. But let's have a little chat about you and your background and how you became to be a performance nutritionist.
Okay, so yeah, I've been brought up in a football town, live like in Liverpool, and yeah, I was taken down to a local football field at the age of like 4 with my granddad, God rest his soul, and yeah, the rest is history. Played with the boys up until that rule change when you're 11, 12 and you can't share changing rooms and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, was kind of thrown in with the lads, so to speak, and toughened up pretty quick. And yeah, went on to then play for Everton Center of Excellence when I was 13, 14. And then I played a decent Sunday League level for quite a while. Moved on to Wigan Athletic. And then in between those phases, I kind of like stopped playing football for a while, went back to it again. All of those like social presses of, do you go out with your mates over weekend? You carry on playing football, kind of went through that cycle. And it was when I was playing for Wigan, I got the opportunity to go to America to, study on a scholarship and play football in Georgia. And I just didn't. I went through the whole process. Like my mum wasn't happy when I didn't go, put it that way. But I didn't go, and I can't really like put my finger on why. But anyway, didn't go, and then finished playing with FC United in Manchester, which was really, really good for me. To be fair, it was a really good setup, professional as Sunday League teams go, and that was kind of where I finished playing football. And the reason that I did stop is because I went back to university to study a master's degree, and something had to give. And sadly, I was not able to dedicate my weekends to playing football. It was being in with the team then. So that was kind of my football journey. But yeah, I'm an Everton supporter. Love football, love watching it. So yeah, that's kind of where my journey comes from, really.
And I think that's quite a common thing that, if people are trying to play football but also trying to do higher education, it is quite difficult to fit in that level of training, isn't it?
Yeah, I just didn't have that whole day of a Sunday. I was weighing it up. I did try and do both for a while. And I was also in like a bit of a CrossFit rabbit hole in terms of training and coaching. So I was overtraining and under fueling. And that is where my kind of passion was ignited due to my mistakes. But yeah, I tried to balance it. And I just thought, you know what, I can't dedicate a whole day on a Sunday to not study. I'm like I've something's got to give, and sadly it was football. And I did fall out of love with it, fall back in love with it. But no, it was definitely the right decision at that time.
And of course, when you qualified as a sort of performance nutritionist, what was your journey into kind of employment? What did you get up to?
Yeah, so Liverpool John Moores is got a great reputation for providing placement opportunities during the master's course. And I think if I didn't have that opportunity, I just wouldn't understand what actually goes on in a team, even though I was part of a team my whole life. I just think when you see maybe a more professional setup and what happens day to day, the dramas that go on, it kind of did open my eyes. And I was fortunate enough to apply for the placement at Manchester United women's team, and I spent essentially 6 months there. It did end due to COVID, but it was naturally going to end anyway. So yeah, I stepped foot into what was Lee Sports Village, where they were based at the time, close to Wigan. And yeah, I was still learning nutrition myself. So to then walk into a team which didn't have any nutrition support, it was an S&C trying to balance it, which again, it's not their fault. It's not at the top of their list. So, and then the expectation is on me as a student to give them all the answers around nutrition. So did it feel the pressure? Yes. Was it hard at the start? Yes. To build relationships. People just see you as the food police. And I didn't want to be that person. So yeah, it was just all about like getting to know the players and just looking at what are the easy wins. But yeah, it was an amazing 6 months on that placement. And if anyone's like listening to this who might be studying, I'm volunteering, I treated that placement like a full-time job. And I'll say it to anyone, I give like my everything to it. And it paid off because I was then still in contact with the club, and then I ended up being paid once a week. So I would head in every Wednesday on the hard training day, and I ended up being the first ever full-time nutritionist in WSL, which I'm glad I'm not that now. There's plenty more, but that was in 2021. And I had an amazing 4 years there, really. I look back on it with like really fond memories.
So let's chat about your 4 years at Manchester United then. You went obviously into a big club. I think some of these misconception is that, well, everything's provided, everything's done, everything's really taken care of. And you just said there that actually it was an S&C kind of, they were trying to balance the performance nutrition. So what did you identify when you went in there that you thought this needs to be done and this could probably help out? What did you do?
Yeah, so from the outside looking in, and I was exactly the same. You think Manchester United, you think of one of the biggest brands in the world, lots of money, but then you have a women's team.
Hmm.
And going back now 5 years ago, yes, football was on the up on the women's side of things, but it definitely was not where it is now, so to speak. And I just went in with the idea of just assess where that famous saying, like the low hanging fruits are. And the first day I went in, they had a breakfast offering in like a banquet suite, and it was very basic. The budget was low, but I thought, no, there's a few easy things that we can do here, and it was just as simple as adding bagels on the hard day,
Hmm.
and that was a game changer. So that won me some friends straight away, and it was just things like adding a fruit juice option, not just having coffee. So that again, that was game changer, and something so simple that I actually just assumed that was already going on, but it wasn't. Um, and then just making subtle changes where there was naturally more carbohydrates available and in their eye line, so that it just created a habit of, oh, it's there, I'll eat it, which obviously you've got to be careful of that.
Hmm.
But it was just, my approach was build relationships, build trust, but also just provide an environment where there's more carbohydrates available. That's not going to blow a budget.
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's a really good point to kind of look at is the low hanging fruit. And I always say when you go in to work with a team where you're trying to impact on change, sometimes if you work with people who want to work with you and then other people see that you're having effect, they'll come and start to ask you and they'll come and start to open up. So from your perspective, you spoke about obviously the training week and you talk about the hard day. What type of training were they doing on the hard day that you thought, "Do you know what, we need to make sure this is fueled for?"
Yeah, so for a typical Sunday game, they would have their hardest day on a Wednesday,
Hmm.
and they would have a pitch session in the morning, which would essentially be 90 minutes with pre-activation beforehand, which was maybe like 20 minutes in the gym. So then you would have a hard pitch session, which would, simulate the load and kind of like maximize the conditioning on that day. And then they would have a lunch break,
Hmm.
and then they would have a gym session, which would be like a heavy lowers and uppers session in the afternoon. So there was an opportunity to fuel the players over the morning and just make subtle changes around carbohydrate availability. Then they would have a lunch break. So again, it's a massive opportunity to refuel and recover, to then be thinking of the gym session in the next 60 to 90 minutes. And when I did look at that, I was like, oh, there's actually probably not enough time before the gym session starts for them to like have the food digestion. But I think that was just the reality of me reading a textbook and what was optimal, and then the reality of being in a team, and that is what time gym's starting. We can't maneuver on that. So yeah, I would kind of learn quickly that, oh, okay, I can't influence that right now.
Mhm.
And that is just the reality of schedules, isn't it?
Yeah.
And different time constraints. Because what I did start to realize as well, being in with the team, is nutrition obviously is so important, but they've also got other meetings that are the priority. The priority is football. Then you've got media, so they are being pulled in lots of different directions. So yeah, I don't think me changing a gym time was my priority right back then.
And I think you bring up a really good point, is that sometimes the textbooks don't naturally translate into real life, do they?
No, no, definitely not. Like having 60 minutes to have your lunch and then a gym session afterwards
Mhm.
is not what you read in textbooks, but you just assess the environment and pick your battles. Like it wasn't a big deal, to be fair, in hindsight.
Yeah. And I think, from a perspective of sort of nutrition, obviously carbohydrates, obviously you've spoken about. How important are carbohydrates with regards to football?
Yeah, you'll hear me, preach it from the rooftops, but they are the body's primary energy source for high intensity exercise, and football is exactly that. They provide the body with not just kind of slow releasing energy, but also like fast acting. So when you carbohydrate load for a match day, the kind of recommendation is to start to increase your carbohydrates 24 hours before your kickoff time. So that can be a combination of slow releasing, fast releasing, and then you're thinking about not just maybe the match day, but also a hard training day. What should carbohydrates look like on a rest day, on a single training day? So, like it or not, they are a huge, huge part of whether you maximize and reach your potential or you don't. And I think there's such a big piece of work to be done around this food group. Like in females, there is a stigma around it, and you've played. I'm sure you've felt the same as well.
We definitely won't be getting into my nutrition on this podcast because that would be very judgmental, I think, from your perspective. You would not be happy. I would definitely have benefited from your services. That's a surefire thing that I definitely would have needed that help. And I think you're right when it comes to, if I just think back to me being an athlete, carbohydrates were demonized. You
Yeah.
don't eat a lot of carbs because there was a whole, the health and fitness industry was basically saying, well, they'll make you put on weight. And
Mm.
we know that in female sport, we do have some issues with disordered eating. Have you come across issues with regards to disordered eating? And, I'm not expecting you to get into the kind of ins and outs
Mhm.
of the whole issue, but what are the types of things that you might look out for?
Yeah, like disordered eating is very common in. I'll just like speak about female football, but yeah, I think some of it is accidental. Like some of it is players have their way of eating, and me coming in to try and change that. They could have been eating that same way for the past 6 years, maybe more. So unpicking and yeah, undoing those, let's just call them bad eating habits, takes time. It's not an overnight thing. So then there's kind of the unintentional, but then there's like the intentional, and then this comes from pressures around what they're reading in the media, social media pressures, which I think now is bigger than ever. With it's not just the elite players, but you are judged on social media by maybe what you look like, how you feel and look in your football kit. Um, so there's a lot of negative body image perceptions that then come along with that and the pressures. So I
Mhm.
think that's where that intentional disordered eating comes in, where I don't really want to feel too full,
Mhm.
um because I'm going to be bloated. It's going to make me gain weight on a scale, and then it's just a vicious cycle of eventually underfueling for chronic periods of time.
Mhm. Mm. And I think, from a physiotherapy perspective, we've often seen complications of that because actually we can sometimes see things like stress fractures start to come through. And we're coming on to podcasts where we're start to going to look at other things like red S and low energy
Yeah.
availability. But sticking with this podcast here, you've obviously now gone from Manchester United, where you went in and you've made some changes. You're now working in other sports. So you're working in women's rugby. Is there a big difference between football and rugby with regards to fueling?
Yeah, good question. So I wouldn't say there's a huge difference. I think one of the main key things that I've noticed is football players habitually don't eat enough if you look at a collective of a squad, whereas rugby players, whether it's cultural, um, they eat enough. And I'm not saying every single person in the squad, but I think if you compare the two, the loads of football players, that all I can comment on is the Manchester United training loads and how their week was structured. Their expenditure is higher,
Mhm.
and guess so it should be. Um, but I would have liked them to eat more overall. But then obviously the rugby it's a different game, right? To a
Mhm.
degree.
Yeah.
So it's a lot about collision, strength, um, but obviously fitness as well. So yes, the game's quite different, but you still need to fuel high intensity exercise for 80 minutes. Um, but I would say there's more of a habitual intake to eat more
Mhm.
in rugby, which is positive.
Yeah, and I think for me, one of the things I always think about with regards to nutrition is there, with regards to fueling and certain positions that players are playing in. If you've got um, players that are doing a lot of sort of high intensity, they're maybe playing on the wing and they're doing a lot of kind of up and down.
Mhm.
Are we at a point now where we individualize nutrition like that for different positions, or we're still needing to get towards that to kind of think of about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think we're not quite there, but what I will say on like the players I'm working with now at England and also some when I was kind of at the back end of Man United was yeah, if you've got I always think of a player like a Hannah Blundell who played for Manchester United. Like yes, she was a defender, but she was up and down that wing and her fitness needed to be at a really good level and a capacity. So like in terms of fueling,
Hmm.
would I push fueling more to her than I would a Rachel Williams who gets 10, 15 minutes a game?
Hmm.
100%, because the demands of Hannah's game is greater than the demands of Rachel's.
Hmm.
Um, and then, yeah, I think into the rugby side now, I think it's just linking with the performance department a bit more to actually see their outputs. And there was a few conversations when we were in Vancouver last month with the rugby for a tournament, and some of the stats on two games that we had out of three where they'd never been pushed so hard in all of their kind of England career. Like the game demand was huge, so there was definitely a big education piece and around how do we now fuel you not just for Premiership rugby or Premiership football, if we're using that as well. We then need to fuel you. So that there's a level, isn't there? There's like a Premiership rugby level and WSL level,
Hmm.
and then there's fueling for international. So like England rugby, lionesses, and then there's performing and fueling when you're in the heat. It could be,
Hmm.
tournaments or even just a game in the summer. Like the demands of that are different, and we need to start to educate and build confidence around how to, step that up each time.
And I think, when you're talking about sports and where it is that you have been working, you've obviously worked in kind of high intensity sports with regards to football, and then their long duration, 90 minutes, 45-minute halves. Then rugby, 80 minutes, 40-minute halves. Now bring me on to Williams, because what are you doing? What are you doing at Williams? Because this is very different. It's really interesting as well.
Yeah, so I started in July with Williams,
Hmm.
and my job role is to provide performance nutrition support to the academy drivers. So in like Carton F3, F2, with the aim that they're going to step up to F1 if they do, and then providing nutrition support for the pit stop crew. So yeah, when you see it on TV where they pull into the pit lane, they're there for not even 2 seconds, and then they're gone. So that has been my kind of new role and learning a completely different sport, which has obviously been challenging but amazing. And I guess in a nutshell, to compare the two, so academy drivers, they're your typical athletes, like they need to drive fast. So, and then the pit stop crew, I still see them as athletes to a degree, because they need to be in a condition where they can be on it within a split second and be able to make decisions and move their body quick enough to change a tire to, like, so nutrition is very different to team sport, to this sport, but a lot of the principles are still the same. Like, they still need a level of carbohydrates. Maybe the timing's a little bit different. They still need caffeine to a degree. I'm thinking more into the pit stop team.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, they still need caffeine to, increase their alertness, sharpness of thought, concentration, but there's still a timing issue. They shouldn't be having it too far away, too soon, because that can maybe make them overstimulated, just like the drivers. You don't want to overstimulate the drivers because there's a lot going on in that car. So yeah, I think like with the pit stop crew, it is at the moment just build and support, because they are dads, their husbands, like their wives. They are just normal human beings, just like everyone else. And you can kind of see them as like a gem pop client at the moment, just to, if someone wanted to lose weight who was a member of the pit crew, then that's absolutely fine, if that will, enhance their performance, if they're able to move that tire quicker, to be able to make those pit stops better and quicker, because that is the ultimate goal, to support them to improve the pit stops for the drivers.
Well, that's it. And they're such a big part of the performance of the team, aren't they? Because if the pit stop crew don't perform, the drivers find it really difficult to perform. And
Yeah.
seconds can be a big thing in that type of sport. So you've worked across basically 3 different sports with all different types of athletes. So what are the biggest mistakes that you've kind of seen and been like, well, if the things I could change, I would focus on these things. What would they be?
Yeah, so I think, like, if we just go back to team sports, is just not consuming enough carbohydrate in the 24 hours before a game.
Hmm.
And I know I mentioned it before around like intentional and unintentional. There is a lot of unintentional underfueling, and that comes down to education, resource, um, and availability. Like, if it's not there, the players are not going to seek it if they don't
Hmm.
know how to or what to seek to.
Hmm.
um, so one of the biggest mistakes has been, yeah, just having players habitually not consume enough carbohydrates the day before a game.
Hmm.
And one thing, obviously, I noticed that when I was at Manchester United, and one thing I did try and do to improve it was make a match day -1 menu based on the
Hmm.
feedback of the players, to make fueling fun and
Hmm.
enjoyable. And one thing we got to a point where we were having some kind of cake and custard every match, every day before a game, whether we were in a hotel, traveling, or whether we had a home game. And then we would also have like a pasta station with,
Hmm.
a chef cooking it when we were in a hotel away. But obviously, match day -1, when the players were at home playing a game at home, they would have their dinner at home. So we provided higher carbs at lunch when we were at the training ground. So like a chicken carbonara, or just a plain carbonara,
Hmm.
garlic bread, little bits of like different pastas.
Hmm.
And there was always a cake and custard if we had a home game, so that we just tried to control what we could, because me telling them that it's okay to have dessert the day before a game to top up your energy stores, who, who knows whether they would go and do that. So we just tried to control it as best we can.
And do you know, it's so interesting that you say that, because I have literally worked with teams and heard of teams where that has been frowned upon by coaching staff. You
Hmm.
no, you don't eat that the day before a game. So there must be a lot of educational needs, not even just for the players. There must be quite a big role for you to play of educating other members of staff. Is that right? Is there a lot of myths out there that you have to kind of bust?
Yeah, no, definitely, like, myth busting sessions happened. And I
Hmm.
think it is a perception thing as well. Like, the perception sometimes of the coach or coaches seeing players eating cake and custard, thinking like, oh, why? Like, that's unhealthy. But yeah, small bits of education and just conversations with coaches was, this is the why. It's enjoyable. sometimes it doesn't even take a thought, like who doesn't want sticky toffee pudding or banana bread, whatever it may be, the day before a game. So yeah, it was just kind of not demonizing food, top and bottom really. It's just, yes, this might be a belief from maybe when you play football or a few years ago, but this is just a strategy to increase carbs and make it fun and easy to do, basically.
And you raised a really good point earlier. You were like, look, where are the resources? Where are people going to go to get this information? Now, luckily, you've come up with something absolutely amazing with two of your colleagues, the Female Football Nutrition Network. So talk to me about that, and then we'll get the Instagram handles, etc. Because I think if you're playing football at the moment and you're not sure what to eat, these guys are definitely somebody that you want to follow.
Yeah, this is a new project, something that we're really proud of, and it was actually Dr. James Moorhen, who worked with the Lionesses for 18 months. He came up with the idea, like he is the founder, and he just said, Aimee, do you think this is a good idea? Like, can we reach more females and impact their performance essentially? And I was like, 100%. I knew I wanted to be in this space and help more people on a global scale, but I didn't know how, and I needed other people to maybe come up with the idea for me. And yeah, like seeing what I've seen over the past few years around females, carbohydrates, body image, confidence in carbs. I am naturally passionate about, reducing carb fear, improving fueling, maximizing the performance. And yeah, we've got a community now that we can provide those resources, education, podcasts, webinars, conversations, like there's ability for them to ask questions. And our mission is to just help as many female footballers as possible improve their performance nutrition.
And you've also got an app, haven't you, which I think is very cool. So if anybody's out there looking to have something on their phone that can tell them potentially what to eat, you've got the solution.
Yeah, and it's essentially performance nutrition in your pocket.
Yep.
Like how can we make an impact and make it easy and accessible and efficient?
And I think,
Create an app.
well, that's it. Yeah, and and certainly looking at it, it appears that you've done that, and but you also have social media channels. So if somebody's looking to find you to kind of find more about your app and more about the kind of project, where would they go?
Yeah, so we have an Instagram account, and it's at Female Football Nutrition. And what we want to continue to do on that page, even while we do have an app, is just to provide as much value and education as possible. And the messages and everything that we've had over the past few months since we did create this idea, well, what once was an idea, is we are impacting parents, coaches, support staff, players, and that is what we ultimately wanted to do. So to take what we're doing on Instagram and take it up a level, to have an exclusive community, to provide more resource education and awareness is something that we're really proud of.
Yeah, and I think you've done an absolutely amazing job. We will continue to share your stuff because I really like it. Even I'm learning, kind of looking at the Instagram posts that you're putting out there. If you are working with players at the moment and you are potentially kind of working on nutrition, please have a look out for Aimee, Evan, and James and their work because it is absolutely amazing. Aimee, I cannot thank you enough for coming on the podcast. It's been lovely to have you on. And from my perspective, good luck with everything with regards to female football nutrition because I really do think it's a brilliant project. And if you're out there working with players at the moment and you're thinking about nutrition, do have a think about the importance of carbohydrate and also please follow the evidence with regards to nutrition. And we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Women's Football Hub. The information within this podcast is for informational purposes only. No material on this podcast is intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your doctor or another healthcare professional if you have any questions about anything raised in this podcast.